That should do it. There it is. Thank y'all. All right, y'all. So over the last few months at this point, we've been talking about how to get started programming in the web. And web development is super exciting. It's one of those types of programming spaces where you get to really see visually what you're building. So if you've been enjoying it so far, building websites, seeing things going, give me some thumbs up, give me some love. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a very exciting career path for sure. And I salute y'all for starting your journey in the web dev space. Over the past few weeks, we've talked a lot about how websites are developed, right? We talked about the fact that every website comes down. There's three important types of code that go into our websites as they are, right? There's HTML, which represents the structure and body of our sites. The CSS represents the style of our personal websites. And then JavaScript, which helps us create actions and do more dynamic programming that involve data and data transferring onto our HTML or in our CSS. If you understand that, give me a thumbs up, because that means that I'm doing a good job trying to explain how these things go. And hopefully you're understanding a lot more about what goes into building these sites out for yourself. So that's great. Thank you. Hey, look at y'all. You know what I'm saying? Look at you, ready to go. So how the where we're at now, right, is we've already begun the process of starting to build these sites in the web. What's next is for us to figure out, how do we build the types of sites that we know and love, right? How do we build the types of websites that drive traffic and that get people excited about what we're building, but also have that modern feel to it, that are responsive, that, that have data on them, right? It's not enough to have a plain website these days, right? Modern websites have a lot of design into them, and not necessarily design in terms of the style of the colors and, all the graphic design elements, but more, there's a lot of different elements that come on websites that we're typically used to, right? Search bars and, think about feeds of content, right? All the apps that we use day to day have certain types of structures to them that involve a number of different types of elements and components to how the page is structured. That word components is going to come in handy. So we're going to talk about that. How do we go into the place of building websites that have those types of structure to them, right? And to do that, I want to introduce y'all to React, which is a framework, a JavaScript-based framework and library that we use in order to build the user interfaces of our sites, in order to create websites that have that added value of making it easier to create these types of very sophisticated sites with different components, different pieces of data moving around, and more modern web-based applications rather than static sites. To do that, over the next few weeks, we're going to be working through a framework called Next.js. And Next is a React framework that will make it so that we can go ahead and start building full stack applications of our own, right? For those of y'all who may be familiar with React, you might know that there's a number of different React libraries that were created in order to allow for us to develop React-based websites. Next is one of those frameworks. There was a framework that was popular for a while for starting up and learning React called Create React App, which was all built by the React team. Next is kind of the more popularized, hey, if you're going to get into React, you should start building your apps with Next. So we're going to be learning Next and working with the Next framework. And so the next framework, funny enough, is a library that will allow us to write in React. But React itself was and still is its own library of itself. And so I'll just go to the React website just so you can see that. New things, right? So React itself is a library that lets us build web user interfaces. And so we're going to be diving deep into the world of React over the next few weeks. Today, let's kind of get into that transition, right? So going from JavaScript to React and understanding how do we go from what we already know, right? If you've been following along these last few weeks, how do we go from what we already know to where we need to be with relationship to React? And both of these websites will be of tremendous value to y'all as you're learning. The Next.js website, which is just nextjs.org, and then the React website, which is react.dev, also very tremendously helpful. So, sorry, swallowing myself wrong. But yeah, let's go. We're gonna start, and we're gonna follow mostly on the Next.js documentation and talk through some of what you can find if you go to Next.js and you go to the Learn section. So today we're gonna talk about. We're gonna kind of get to Next, but in a way that will allow for us to see the value. So we're going to start actually from JavaScript to React. And the next tutorial has a very great breakdown of this process. So what we're going to do today is talk through it, and I'm going to give you added value, added context to what we're seeing here to hopefully make things make a lot more sense for you as we get into the core foundational elements of what React projects consist of. So to start, the first thing we got to remember is when we build our websites, right, we're writing HTML, and the HTML is not just happenstance that HTML is HTML, right? The hypertext markup language was part of one of the systems that was designed while the web was being created. And the web, as we remember, if you remember the first session we had where I was talking to y'all about, the difference between the internet and the web, right? We were talking a lot about how communication works between two computers. We talked about how client computers like you and me who are making requests to other computers, which we call servers, receive data from those computers that we then can see on our own devices. So give me a thumbs up if you remember what I'm talking about, right? There's client computers and there's server computers. Client computers perform what we call requests to server computers, and server computers respond with some data, right? That process is called the client server model, and that is a very important. That's an important communication in how the web works, right? One of the ways that a web server can respond to a client is by sending data, right? And you can send a number of different types of variable like data. Like I could send a string, or I could send a Boolean, or I could send that kind of data. But I can also send files, right? And I can also, in sending files, have certain things happen when I send files. One of the types of files that we typically will see sent in that relationship then is HTML files. So hopefully this is tracking, right? The reason HTML is important is because, not just because, hey, this is the de facto, this is how we write our structure of our sites, but also servers can return HTML to clients making requests, right? That is how we use the web every day, right? We go to a particular website, like I went to the react.dev website, and this website is hosted on a server. That server returned back some HTML as a document, and that document is now being reloaded in my browser when it got returned. That's the experience that we have. So HTML is by and large how we communicate across the web, because we're typically using these websites to perform certain things. Over the last few sessions, we talked about the different things consisted in an HTML document, right? An HTML document consists of basically a set of elements that we call HTML tags that represent different elements on the page. An HTML document will break up its kind of tags between what we call the head and the body, right? The head is where we kind of store the metadata and the things that are related to the site's linking of data for itself. The body is where we create those elements that are the visible elements that we would see on the page. So quick thumbs up if y'all understand this. We all here, we all in sync. You know what I'm saying? This is all the fundamental stuff that comes up, right? So if that makes sense to you, then all of this should hopefully make sense. When we started talking about JavaScript, right, we said that JavaScript has the capability of taking an HTML document, one that may have been returned from the server or whatnot, and any HTML document, we can connect JavaScript to that document and use what we call the document object model in order to break that document up from HTML into specific objects that the JavaScript library can use and give us functions and properties from that we can call in our JavaScript code. So the document object model is essentially what we call an API, a programming interface for JavaScript that connects to our HTML. So any JavaScript that is linked or scripted into an HTML document can then manipulate that HTML document. And it does so by creating this tree of elements that we see here, right? So when a user makes that request and we have the server, et cetera, all those things going on, the page will give us back this HTML. If the HTML consists of some JavaScript, the JavaScript can then break that HTML up into this tree of different nodes. And that's what the document object model is, right? The document object model gives JavaScript that ability to just pausing because it looks like I'm lagging. Okay. The document object model gives JavaScript the ability to connect to these different nodes in the tree and then perform certain actions like creating elements, removing elements, updating elements, the whole 9 yards. So we need JavaScript in the process of connecting to our HTML and our CSS so that we can do more dynamic things like have elements appear or have elements get removed, etc. Whole lot. So as you can see here, like a JavaScript, if we were building out like an interface on a website, we would be building that in HTML, but JavaScript would give us the ability to, one, to interact with the elements that we already put in our HTML document, but two, it will also give us the ability to programmatically create these elements. If you can understand what I'm saying, give me a thumbs up, right? JavaScript can be used to programmatically build out our HTML document because it can connect to the document and perform these various actions. That makes sense to you? A thumb would be appreciated. You know what I'm saying? Your boy just looking for some validation because all this stuff can get confusing. But if it makes sense to you right now, then that's great. We're on a good page. All right, cool. So the document object model in JavaScript allow for us to manipulate the HTML. And yeah, like Samuel said in the chat, it makes it modular, right? It allows us to just customize things as it goes, right? Rather than have everything all at once, we can actually use JavaScript to make things on the fly, right? And remove things on the fly, etc. So that's one big point. The other point about JavaScript that's important to remember is when we use JavaScript to make our websites actionable, data-driven, right? When things happen, we want things to happen. So JavaScript is useful also in creating the opportunity for us to programmatically do things when the user makes certain actions, right? So if a user clicks on something, we might want something to happen. JavaScript helps us do that. If a user drags on something, JavaScript can help us make that happen. When the page loads and that event happens, JavaScript can make certain things happen. So hopefully from these last few sessions, if you've taken nothing away, you see that we need JavaScript in order to perform these more robust actions in our HTML pages that make them a lot more interactive, one, because of the events and stuff, but also dynamic, right? Elements can be created on the fly based on what a user's doing versus, hey, you have to have all these elements already there. Pages can be what we call dynamic in that sense. So we can use the document object model to make all of this happen, right? So true or false, you can update the page content by manipulating the DOM. True, right? We could definitely do that. I already filled this out, so this is going to give you the answers. I wish I could reset it, but y'all know the vibes. All right, so let's keep going. As an example, right? Here, if you go through the next tutorial, you'll see this example and you could perform it yourself. But what we're looking at here is a sample HTML document, right? This HTML document contains those elements we were just talking about, the HTML tag, and they don't have a head because they're not doing anything creative there, but they have a body. Inside of the body of these two tags, we see a div element, right? And a div element is essentially just the div element is essentially just a container, right? The div, you can use divs to wrap around different elements. If you've seen divs or have experience with them, just give me a thumbs up. I'm sure that from maybe like the tic-tac-toe assignment, you probably remember what a div is or how a div works. Great. Um, so we have in this HTML document that we're building, just a div, an empty kind of container. There's no elements in there, right? What they're saying here is, well, we can also give that div a particular ID, right? That ID is an attribute, and that attribute would represent would allow us to basically give that element a unique identifier that we can refer back to at some point in time, right? So if I ever want to connect with this particular div, I can use its ID to say, hey, I want the div that's in my HTML document, but I want the div with the ID of app, right? And this is important for the document object model, right? With the document object model, like we've seen, we can target all these elements, right? One of the ways we target elements is by way of its ID, right? So giving this div the ID will make it easier for us to use the document object model later to find that particular div. Again, pulse check. I'm just trying to make sure y'all see it as we build it, so you get it. Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense to you, right? We're creating an ID so that we could target this type of element at a different point. Cool. I see 6, 7 folks, you know what I'm saying? How about y'all? How about the rest of y'all? You know what I'm saying? If you don't see it, please drop it in the chat or ask any question that you might have. Because I know this gets confusing, but I want y'all to really kind of see how we're connecting the dots here, right? So the div is just an element. This could be a H1, this could be anything, right? But they just chose this div, right? And for now, they're giving it an ID of app so that we can basically see that that element with but we can basically select that element with that app ID. So I can find an element that has the ID app. Because IDs can only be used once, it will always refer to this div itself, right? So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing that they're doing is also fairly simple, right? They're adding a JavaScript tag into the HTML, right? And we now know in order to use JavaScript inside of our applications, we have to add a JavaScript tag, right? And the JavaScript tag is just created with the simple script tag, right? And we have the ability in this tag to do one of two things. We can either open the tag, and inside, in between kind of the open and closing tags, we can write our JavaScript, or we can connect this JavaScript to a particular file, right? And allow for the JavaScript to be run from a particular file. So this is them giving an example of that, right? So here in this script tag, what they're doing is adding some JavaScript. So if you remember, anything in between the script tag can be valid JavaScript. We could just use that JavaScript and run that JavaScript when the page loads, right? So in this case, in this script, we have this const app and document get element by ID app, right? So what this is doing, right, is this is grabbing the element, right, the div with the ID app, and setting it to a variable, right? So that we can refer to it later. If that makes sense to you, just give me a quick thumbs up so I know that y'all rocking with me and I'm not just talking to myself about JavaScript files, right? What we're doing here is just setting a variable with the returned element from this document object model function, get element by ID. If it's not making sense, please drop in the chat, ask a question. Would love to make sure that this makes sense to everybody, because this is the stuff that you don't really hear about how React works, but we're breaking it down so that hopefully by the end of it, it's very simple. You understand, oh, I get what React is going to be doing for me. Because you might be like, well, what does this have to do? What does this have to do with React, Cam? But if you understand this part so far, great. If not, please drop it in the chat and I'm happy to assist. So, whoops, hopefully I didn't click that. Great. So we're just grabbing a reference to this app, right? Things are kind of pushing forward in that sense. Can I repeat? I got you, bro. Yeah, I can repeat this as many times as it takes for everybody to feel like they understand it. In this little body of code, right? Well, let's go to this one. In this little body of code, right? I'm creating an HTML document. Hopefully that makes sense. In that HTML document, in the body, right? I have a div. A div is just a simple element that I can create things inside of, or I could put elements inside of this div, right? The other element that I have in the body here is a script, and the JavaScript tag allows for us to then write JavaScript inside of the script tag, right? So in between this tag and this closing tag, anything in between will just have to be valid JavaScript, and the code will run when the page is loaded, right? Right now, all this JavaScript is doing is saying, hey, let me connect to my HTML document that I'm connected to, and I want to get the element that has an ID called app, right? And I want to save whatever that element is to this variable called app, right? And this function, document get element by ID, like we talked about, is using the document object model to find this element right here, right? And this element right here is then going to be saved in the app variable that we created. Does that make sense to you? I know I've just made y'all do it, but if it makes sense to you, give me a thumbs up. You know what I'm saying? Just want to keep making sure everybody's on the same page. Groovy, groovy. Can we get it? Can we get it? Yeah, there we go. I appreciate y'all. You know what I'm saying? I know I made y'all just do it, you know what I'm saying? But hey, better, no man, woman, child left behind. You know what I'm saying? Cool. So what we're doing here is just very simple HTML and JavaScript, if you understand those two things, right? We're creating some HTML elements in the body, two elements, particularly the div and the script, and we're running some JavaScript that's connecting to our document. It's a very interesting process, but if you've been paying attention these last few sessions, all we're doing is saying, hey, based on whatever elements are inside of the body, or based on any elements inside of my HTML document, period, right? I have the ability to find, target, and do things to those elements using JavaScript. And that's exactly what we're doing here, is in this script tag, I'm finding this element and I'm saving it to a variable. I'm not really doing anything yet except saving it to a variable, which will let me do stuff to it later. Cool. So just like the tutorial I was talking about, we can continue to add to the JavaScript. And so in this example here, we're going to just programmatically, like we talked about, we can programmatically in JavaScript use JavaScript in order to add elements, create elements, right? Update elements. We can do all types of stuff using JavaScript. And what we're doing here is after we find the app, the element that is our div, right? We're going to create a new H1 element, right? And so we can do that by saying, oh, okay, hey, document, create a new element called new H1 element, excuse me. This H1 element, we're going to save it as a variable in JavaScript, because this is all JavaScript, as header, like the name header is the name of this element that was created, right? The next thing you have to do if you want to programmatically have JavaScript build an element on your screen for you, right, is you have to tell the document to create a node, a new node, right? There's different types of nodes you can create, but when you're creating text nodes, you use this create text node method, right? Creating a text node basically will allow for us to write the text, create like text that we can have. Just the almost like, remember how I told y'all that HTML, like in HTML, text is valid HTML, right? Well, you can't create an element. You can't create an element of text, right? But what we do is we create a text node, which would represent kind of an HTML element that is the text that we're trying to type out. So what they're doing here is they're creating the content for that header by way of first creating the text node so that we can use that text node as we can use that text node in our JavaScript here, right? So all they're going to do next is add a new child to the header that they created first. So here we have the header that we created. We created an element, right? And the element itself is just a H1. It doesn't show up. It doesn't do anything until we actually set it into our document for real. But we created the H1, and here they're creating the text for the H1, right? So when we call the append child, we're basically saying take this text and add a new HTML child to whatever this HTML is, right? And if you remember how HTML works is any element that is inside of another element's tags, right, is a child element to that element, right? So the div, here's a little pop quiz for y'all, right? So the div, the script, right? These are two elements, right? They are the child of what element in this HTML document? Just drop it in the chat. Is the child of what element? Or are the children of what element? Go ahead and drop it in the chat. Yeah, the body, right? Exactly, the body, right? To be a child, you have to be coming under something, right? Basically, right? So the body is we would say the body is the parent of the other elements that we have inside of here, right? And remember, the script element, this whole script element here, the script element is really just this opening tag and closing tag. Everything in here is not elements. This is JavaScript code, right? So this doesn't count. But so there's only two elements here. We have the div and the script, right? All right. So one more pop quiz for y'all now that you learned that, right? The body is the child of what element in this HTML document here? Y'all just try to be teachers' pets out here in the chat right now, you know what I'm saying? But y'all see that was a good teacher modeling, you know what I'm saying? So first I explain something, and then I give you another opportunity. So now y'all probably feel lit. Y'all like, yeah, the HTML document, bro. We know that. Yeah. You should feel lit. You should feel lit. You get it. If header content becomes a child of header, what's the name of the tag created then? Good question. So basically, if you think about it, the header, right, is creating an element. This element is going to become the tag. This is the H1, right? So if you remember, there's an H1 tag that we can create in HTML. It's the header, right? But if you remember, the header needs text inside of it to show something on the page, right? So the header content, this document create text node is really just creating the text that will be inside of our header. But we are creating an H1 element. And then, you know, what you need to do, this is all to do it programmatically, right? So if I want to programmatically do this, right? First, I create the header, so I create the parent element. Then I create the element that I'm going to then make the child, right? So I have to create two elements. One is the header, and then one is the text that's going to be in my header, right? So those are just two separate elements that I just created. Then I use the function to add the text element into my header. So now I have the header and the text element is inside of the header, right? And then the closing tag for the header, right? So now I have a header with some text inside of it, right? That is what this line did. And then the last line in this JavaScript is we're adding another child to our document by taking the app, which is our div, right? And adding a child to this particular element, right? So eventually our whole code will look like, once this code runs, right? We have our div, we'll have our header, and then we'll have the closing tag of the div because of the programmatic work that we just did in these lines. If that makes sense to you, give me a thumbs up. That's just the best place to start and stop real quick. Dope. Cool. So let's take a look at this. Let's just take a look at this, because I feel like I have some folks that don't believe me. They're like, how does this do this, right? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead. Let me open a new window in VS Code so we can take a look at this together. So let me make sure my desktop isn't a hot mess for y'all, wonderful people, and boom, let's do this. All right, cool. So I'm gonna open up a VS Code window. Pardon me for the fact that it's taking a quick second. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new, I'm going to create a new little project for us to see this. And we'll see, y'all will see what I'm talking about in real time. I think sometimes it's helpful to see. So here's what I wanna do. I'm just gonna create a new folder, and I'm gonna call it JS to React. And in here, right, in here, this would just be a project folder. So I'm going to open this folder up for myself. And when it finally reloads, y'all know vibes, we're going to get busy and we're going to make some magic happen real quick. So yeah, so essentially, right, I have this empty project. So I'm going to go ahead and just create an index.html file in here. That's going to pull up a blank HTML for me. And when that finally does that, I'll paste that code that we just got from the tutorial, just so that y'all can see kind of what's going on real quick. So, so because this is HTML element, I'm gonna say just kind of start the code off with that comment, the doc type HTML, then create my HTML. Matter of fact, I could probably paste that now that I did this. Cool. So yeah, right. The only thing that's missing from what we normally would see is the head, but I could add the head if I want here, just like this. Right. So this would be a very valid HTML document. Ooh, I trust myself. Yes. Cool. Right. So basically what we're doing is creating a simple HTML document. And pardon me as my VS Code is just getting together. Right. So essentially, if I minimize this script, right, you can see there's only two elements in this HTML file right now, the div and the script, right? Okay, so if, let's say, for instance, I go ahead, I'm going to just comment out this script tag, right? Comment out all the stuff inside of it. I'm going to save this and I'm going to open it with the live server. And that should help us kind of get a sense real quick of what's going on here, right? So the live server is going to open up this HTML file. And as you can see, we don't really see anything, right? Well, why is that? Well, this div is here, but a div is just an empty container. It doesn't have anything inside of it. Unless you style the div, you're not going to really see anything, right? Because divs are great wrapping elements to divide the website into different sections and components and stuff like that. Once I add this script tag back though, right? Let's just add this script tag back and save this, right? When the save finally finishes, because sometimes my drawing takes a quick second to save, right? We should see something interesting happen in our version here, right? So let me make sure, got this, okay, right? And cool, right? So now, as you can see, we have this text coming out of nowhere, right? Because nowhere is this text element here. That's what I'm saying this code did, right? This JavaScript code was used in order to programmatically create the H1, right? So if we take a look at the actual code, right? Let's inspect this code real quick. You'll see what I'm saying in that the elements now on this website look a little different, all right? Inside of here, you can see that now we have a div with an ID of app, and inside of here we have the H1, right? Give me a thumbs up if you see what I'm saying, right? We have the div with the H1 here, but if we look at our actual HTML, we only have just this div and some JavaScript, right? The JavaScript built the H1 for us so that our page finally showed it this way. Beautiful. Thank you all for those that gave me some thumbs. I appreciate you. All right, so let's keep it pushing, right? Because this is important. This is what JavaScript does for us, right? But why does this become important for like what we're talking about doing within a React context? Yeah, Nora, I got you. Of course, sister. Of course, right? Let's dial back real quick. They're like, dial it back real quick, right? So by nature of this code, right? If I just had kind of a simple HTML file like this, right? And I'll zoom in for y'all. An HTML file like this is perfectly valid HTML, but all we're gonna see is an empty page because of the fact that this page itself doesn't have anything visible showing up, right? If I wanted to have something visible showing up, I can add stuff into my div. So let's say, for instance, I add an H1 and I say something like, I made this, right? And this H1 is one that I put personally, right? So when on this page finally reloads, you can see that it's there, right? Which is cool, great, right? But If I want to do that same thing programmatically, right, have this H1 show up, I can do that by using JavaScript, right? So what we were just looking at is the JavaScript that would allow us to do that, right? In order to do that, there's a couple different steps we have to take. Step one is we have to find the element that we're going to manipulate in the JavaScript, which is this div right here. Second, we have to create the new element that we want to build, right? So that's what we did here. Because this element is a text-based element, we have to also create the text that we want inside of that element. After we create both the header and the text inside of it, right? Then we can add the text so that it goes inside of the header. And then we can finally add that whole thing back into the code. It seems very complicated because it is doing something kind of interesting, right? We're using JavaScript to basically programmatically write, like essentially, if we think about what this JavaScript is doing, first thing it does is like, okay, like separate to before it puts it inside of the app, right? The JavaScript's like, okay, I'm gonna create an H1, right? So create a H1 might just create us a H1 kind of like this, right? Then the create a text node would just realistically create us an HTML element where the inside of that element is really just that text, right? Then finally, this line adds this first text into our header as a child. So you remember, if anything is a child of another thing, it puts it inside of that thing, right? So here, what we'd see is like an H1 with the text inside of it, right? That's really what happens in these steps. The last step would then be to take this H1, and then finally, we would create our div that has the H1 inside of it, right? Kind of like this. So that's what happens to ultimately put the H1 element inside of this div, which is what we see when we go and look at the and when we go and see the code in our source. Well, I gotta reload this, John, and save this so that it would do it. But hopefully you get the gist. If that makes sense to you, just give me a quick thumbs up. You know what I'm saying, right? We're just using the JavaScript to programmatically build these elements. And again, you might be saying, all right, Cam, well, what does it have to do with anything? We've been talking about this. Of course, we've been talking about this. But if you think about it, right, this process is great. This makes sense. There's a lot of JavaScript that we can use to do this stuff. And the cool thing is that this is what makes our sites dynamic, is the fact that we can programmatically do things. If someone clicked a button, right, I could run this JavaScript as a function. I could say, hey, if someone clicks this button, do all of this stuff. And that would add that element into my web page, right? That is the power that JavaScript has, is not only can we just create it when the page loads, we can also create it when different things happen on the page, right? So that's what's going on here. And so this is showing how the source code changes based on what's going on in the DOM, right? The HTML file represents what is called the initial page content. The document object model represents the updated page content, which gets changed by the JavaScript that we're writing. So that's basically the point here, right? We can always update the document, HTML document, with JavaScript. And this is the real big point that we're trying to make, right? This isn't really the easiest to read, right? This isn't really the easiest to do. Imagine if you wanted to create a whole website programmatically like this. How many of y'all, thumbs up if you would want to create a whole website like this with all these elements in JavaScript? Thumbs down if you're like, nah, you can miss me with all that. Which would you rather do? Would you rather do it programmatically yourself, or would you not rather do it, you know what I'm saying, like all this way, right? Right, exactly, right? It's not the easiest syntax, right? Of course, it's cool that we can do this, but hey, I would rather just have the element. I don't want to have to programmatically do all of this stuff, right? And that's some of the frustrations that developers in JavaScript were having, right? It's like, well, I don't want to have to write so much JavaScript to do this, but hopefully you see that we need to do this, right? We need JavaScript to be able to make these elements on the fly, et cetera. But we don't want it to be as complicated when we're writing it to do so, right? That is the fundamental thing. Keep that in your brain. That's the problem that is a problem for all the JavaScript developers writing JavaScript. Was like, we have to keep writing all this very, what we call verbose, a lot of words, a lot of code to do this thing. But as this says, right, as the size of an app or a team grows, it could be increasingly challenging to build applications this way. Why would we want to do this? Imagine you had to do 1,000 elements, right? 1,000 elements, and you have 3, 4, 5 lines of code. That's 5,000 lines of code, right? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not gonna be helpful, right? So, what developers are trying to figure out are new ways to go ahead and create to make this process simpler, right? And this is what this whole breakdown is showing you is there's a difference in having to be imperative in what you're writing, where you're basically writing out every step, one step at a time for the code to run, right? Imperative programming is a command. I'm telling you, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, right? It's kind of like an immigrant parent. Am I right? You know what I'm saying? As a son of an immigrant child, you know what I'm saying? It's like you do this, and then you do this. You're not gonna go figure this out yourself. You know what I'm saying? I'll tell you what y'all do. Y'all do this, and then this. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's imperative programming, right? So maybe now you walk away, you're like, dang, my parents were imperatively programming me. Yeah, that's exactly what they was doing, right? Now, there's a difference between imperative programming and declarative programming, right? Declarative programming is very gentle parenting. It's like, hey, you're gonna be like this, maybe. And if you are like this, great. and declarative programming is like, I'm going to describe how I think things are going to go, and then we'll figure it out as we go, right? Imperative is like step by step. So here's a great example. In other words, imperative programming is like giving a chef step-by-step instructions on how to make a pizza. Declarative programming is like ordering a pizza without being concerned about the steps it takes to make the pizza. You're like, I want a pepperoni pizza, right? And the declarative program be like, I got you. Here's a pepperoni pizza. Imperative programming is like, first I want you to get the dough. Then I want you to flatten the dough. Then I want you to flour the dough. Then I want you to toss the dough. Then I want you to put the tomato. And if I mess up any of those steps, everything messes up, right? My pizza gonna be disgusting, right? But imperative programming requires that step by step by step by step. Declarative programming says, hey, I would like a pizza, and then let the program figure out how that works, right? So this is a long way to get to, rather than build our apps like this with this declarative approach in JavaScript, which by just nature of how JavaScript was started and written, like, right, how the document object model functions work requires us to be imperative, right? Because of how you have to do it. You have to say, hey, find the element you're going to be manipulating. Then build the next element, then build the text for that element, then add the text to that element, then add that element to the first element, right? That's how the document object model functions work by default. If you wanted to build if you want to add an element programmatically, these are the steps you got to take. But it's very imperative, right? It's not the easiest to write or easiest to read sometimes when you're doing it at scale, right? So we wanted to figure out, is there a way to do all of this? Because we still got to do it. We got to do it. There's no way around it. We got to do it. But is there a way to do it declaratively? So instead of having to spell out all the steps that go into making a node on the DOM, can't I just use something that declares the element I want on the DOM and it does this for me, right? That, my friends, is why they made React. I want to just mic drop. I just want to mic drop. If that makes sense to you, give it a thumbs up. You know what I'm saying? Because if that makes sense to you, I just did my job like an OD professional, bro. Like if that makes sense to you, give it a thumbs up. Give me some love. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like that was the most saucy breakdown of React I've ever done in 4 years of teaching this class. I just kind of went there. You know what I'm saying? I just went there. You know what I mean? React is supposed to be the solution to that problem. Instead of us having to type all of these steps every time we want to create an element in JavaScript, we can actually use React to simplify this process. I'm gonna mic drop it again. You know what I'm saying? Dang. You know what I'm saying? That's what it is. That's what it's for, right? We don't want to have to write all these steps. Like, especially if the steps repeat, especially if it's like create this element, then do this, then do this, then do this, right? What if we could simplify that process? And that is exactly what we are using React to do, right? React is a library, as you can see, right? for building web and native user interfaces, typically we talk about it. Oh, well, this is going to get all up into the weeds. We're going to get into the weeds in a second. But React is a declarative library for building out our user interfaces in JavaScript. So we use React to be more declarative and saying, hey, I would like a this. And then React library does the imperative steps for us so we don't have to do it. That's why everybody loves it. That's why we all are using it, because it makes the process of building these types of JavaScript elements and scripts into our website that much more simple. So yeah, so that's where that's going, right? So quick review for y'all. Which of the following statements is more declarative? Knit the dough, roll the dough, add tomato, add cheese, add ham, or a Hawaiian pizza, please? A or B? Put it in the chat. Which is the declarative one? Not the imperative one. Which is the declarative one? Y'all are like, you know this, just go ahead. But this is for you. It's not for me. This is for you. I do this for y'all. You know what I'm saying? I love me some JavaScript. I love me some React. I'm doing this for y'all. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully y'all see this and y'all love this, right? Exactly. This is the most way to be declarative. I would like a Hawaiian pizza, and then something else will figure out the steps for me. Exactly. Woo, man, I'm on one. That was such a dope breakdown of React. Mashallah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just come here and do my work. You know what I'm saying? All right. So how will React do all this for us? How is React going to just be magically creating our elements on the fly? Well, React is a JavaScript script, for lack of better words, right? React is a big code base. You actually can look at the React code base if you're ever curious. You're like, wow, I wanna see what React is built off of or how it's working, right? This is actually a good idea for all of y'all, is to just, on GitHub, you can actually go and see open source code that is popular, right? And so the React.js code base is a popular open source code base, right? So there's a lot of developers working on React all the time. So if you go ahead and I think if we just say React.js, let's see, and we should get the React repo up. That would be very helpful for this demonstration. But y'all getting all types of random stuff. It's here, trust me. Let's see. I wonder if they changed the, oh, here it is. My bad. All right, thank you. All right. So if you go to github.com/Facebook/React, you're going to get the React code base. And you might be like, whoa, Facebook. Oh, yeah. Did I forget to mention that the developers, engineers at Facebook were the ones that created this open source framework called React. And then, because it was out there for everyone, it became what it is, right? But they started it because of this problem that they were having. And here you go, right? 16,000 commits. How many of us have 16,000 commits on one repo? That's crazy. But this is the React library. So you could just poke around and look at the code. It's all a lot of code. But what you'll find is that this code, the React library code, allows for us to, let me see. Basically, the React code is a code base, right? So there's a lot of different JavaScript files in here. Just trust me on this. There's a lot of different files in here, right? So what we want to do is we want to use the React library and the files that are included in it in order to make our websites and web apps a little bit more easy to write, because we can use React to do some work for us, right? So to do that, we can leverage the scripts that are built into the React library to help us in that process. So the way that it typically works is we load the scripts into our code base. And these scripts are hosted right now on a website like unpackage.com, which basically takes that code base and unpackages it in our HTML files as a regular JavaScript executable JavaScript script, right? So you can see that here, right? There's a couple different examples of the types of code here, but realistically what this is, right, is a JavaScript file. You can see that by the .js, but it's a JavaScript file that contains all the JavaScript that you would expect to see for using React, right? So there's a lot of stuff in here, right? And kind of hard to see, but as you can see, hopefully, this is some JavaScript. It's not the prettiest, but you see some function this and some new string that, right? You see a bunch of different JavaScript in here. So you can pull in external JavaScript into your apps, right? By way of using the script tag. So if I want external JavaScript in my application, all I have to do is in my HTML file, add some more script tags. And that's exactly what they're doing here. So what they're saying is, hey, like, what if we were to redo this whole thing just with React? Well, in order to do that, first I need the React libraries, because the React libraries have the code that will then make it so I don't have to imperatively put all those steps together. To get the React code, I just have to add the scripts that link to the React packages, right? And that's what these two lines are doing here. Here we still have our JavaScript, right, that we did before, that was just targeting the element for the app, right? So what we will be doing with React is making it so that instead of us directly manipulating the DOM with our own JavaScript, we can use a function that's built into these packages to do it for us in an easier way, right? So let me just go ahead. I'll just grab these scripts and I'll put them in our code real quick. So do this. So I just added the two JavaScript scripts in there, and we have this because we're gonna basically go the route of not doing all of this imperative stuff. I'm just gonna, for now, comment out this imperative stuff. We might look at it again later, but right now I just have these two scripts, right? But if I want to have, if I want to then use React instead of regular JavaScript to manipulate the document, right? I can use this new method, React DOM.render, in order to tell React to render an element for us in our particular element, our app, right? So instead of 6 methods, we can maybe just use 1, right? So the React DOM render function works like this, right? In our JavaScript, in our script for our JavaScript, first we're going to find the app, the element that we want to target. Then we can create and render a new element inside of the app. That's basically what this one line of code does, right? MashaAllah, hallelujah, right? Hey, we have everything in one go right here. You know what I'm saying? That's lit, right? So all we have to do, if I want to create that same effect is that we had before, is instead of having to do all of these different lines of stuff, I'm sorry, y'all, that construction is getting at me, but it's all good. We're gonna keep it pushing. And instead of having to create a 6-line bit of code, right? I can create 2 lines of code, one that gets the app that I want to target, and then one that uses these React packages to render a new element in the app, right? So I'm going to save this, and here you're going to see something that pops up, right? We're going to get an error, right? The first error that we're going to see in a minute is going to reload, but it's going to probably take some time. Maybe if I go to the console, we'll see it there. But we're going to get an error because the syntax doesn't fully make sense. There you go, right? Unexpected token, right? Well, that is because what we're writing here isn't actually JavaScript, right? Here we're saying, hey, I want some HTML, right? But this is JavaScript. This is HTML, but this is JavaScript, right? So this syntax of HTML is not recognized by React, right? Or by JavaScript, right? We need to figure out a way to convert the HTML that we want to write into JavaScript so that we can communicate between those two different types of languages, right? So we need to figure out how to get valid JavaScript. And the good news is React figured that out as well. They figured out a way for us to write JavaScript that will be able to be interpreted and turned back into HTML. To do that, we use what we call JSX, which is a syntax in JavaScript that looks like HTML, acts like HTML, but it's really JavaScript, right? And so JavaScript is essentially an HTML-like syntax. It's not HTML because it's going to be JavaScript. We can reference it like JavaScript, but it's going to be used in order for us to write our JavaScript out so that we can programmatically create the elements that we want to create in React, right? So in order to use JSX, right, we need to make sure that our browser understands JSX. It understands, hey, we're actually going to be using JSX in our code. JSX itself is just like I said, it's just this kind of funky code syntax that looks like HTML, acts like HTML in a lot of ways, but it's JavaScript. And our browser doesn't understand that. That's why we're getting that error that we're seeing here, right? Unexpected token, right? So in order to do that, to fix it, we use a library called Babel, which helps us. Essentially, Babel will transform our code such that we can have the code minified in a way so that the React code that will essentially turn our code back into HTML for us is able to be done. So the Babel basically is like, think of it like converting the language of the JSX into the HTML that we need it to be. So to do that, we're going to add this other script to our code. So now we have 3 external scripts in there, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And now we need to tell Babel what code to transform by changing the script type from text JavaScript to text JSX. So it knows, hey, this JavaScript script is of type JSX instead of just type JS, right? It's not just regular JavaScript. We're actually writing JSX in here, right? So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and grab this attribute, and inside of my script that I was writing, add that in there so that it knows the stuff going on in there, right? So cool. So I'm going to save this. Oh, it says my internet is bugging, but hopefully y'all can still hear me. So I'm gonna change that, right? And now as we're looking, oops, that's not it. Here, right? We can see that our code reloaded and we actually have the elements that we want here. So instead of having this say develop preview ship, I'm gonna say welcome to React, my friends. And there we go. Welcome to React, my friends. Welcome to the world of React, y'all. We lit. Hey, we lit. Give me some love, you know what I'm saying? So what we did was break down, right, a process that took us 7 lines of code to do one thing to 2 lines of code. Well, 2 lines of code, but we need to use 3 scripts. So still kind of less than 7 lines of code, but hey, we didn't have to programmatically do all that stuff ourselves, right? So now imagine, with this 1 line of code, I can create whole experiences of writing new HTML, right? So here, right now I'm adding an H1, right? But imagine if I had a div, and the div has inside of it, maybe the div has an H1, and maybe the div has a paragraph, right? So I'm writing this here. It's not going to look the nicest because it's all crunched together, but right, I'm just going to show you for dramatic effect. Let's say I add more elements in here. Adding more elements to this one function will still make sense, right? Because now I'm just writing HTML like using that JSX syntax in order to create the elements that I want to create. Whoops, let's see. I think I missed something. Oh yeah, I did. Syntax error. But there you go, right? I can add as many elements to that 1 line, it'll still work, which is kind of crazy, right? Before, if I wanted 2 elements, I would have to done that 7 line of things twice, right? Now I can do 1 code, 1 call, and I can add as many elements as I want. Imagine if I passed in a whole website of code into this, right? Well, that's the type of thing that React will allow for us to do easier. And the way it does that is by way of creating the opportunity for us to write our code out in files, right? And then we can use those files and reference the code in those files, just like a variable, right? And pass that data into this React DOM render function. And in order to do that, right, that's what we use these libraries like Next and Create React App to organize our files, to make it even smarter at performing the action of taking this JavaScript and creating our web experiences in the JavaScript. So here you can see it's just kind of comparing, right, the short lines with the React versus the long lines with regular JavaScript. And we all can see the difference, right? So why we need to compile our React code, right? React uses JSX, which needs to be compiled into JavaScript. React doesn't know how to update the DOM. It needs a compiler. React uses a new version of HTML. No, it uses JSX, which needs to be compiled into JavaScript. So fire, right? So let's see. We're only at this third stage, but we'll get to the middle stage, right? So good news is y'all know a good amount of the JavaScript we need to know in order to work on React. Even better news is that the next website will give you even more insight into the types of JavaScript operations that will be common for you to use when we're working with React. So, you know, beyond the functions, objects, arrays, or arrow functions we talked about, there's a couple other things that will be very helpful for you to know. So I highly recommend that you go through the rest of this tutorial so that you can see those things for yourself. When we get back to class next week, we're going to be building out our sites in React. And to do that, we're going to need to understand the core concepts of React that make it easy for us to create our files and create all these different experiences that will ultimately just make the process of rendering code that much easier. And those three concepts are creating components, passing data via props, and passing data via using data in state. These three elements right here are what we're going to spend the most of our time these next few weeks on understanding, because they're the central elements to how we build React-based websites and web applications, I would say, because these are JavaScript applications. Components, props, and state. Understanding these three things is the task of us continuing to build out more React websites. But hopefully you can see from just this little demonstration, hopefully you can see from this demonstration the ways in which we use React. We can go from JavaScript to React, right? And the way we do that is we can leverage the React libraries. And what the React libraries will allow us to do is create more sophisticated JavaScript that will allow for us to turn our JSX code, which is this HTML-like code, into valid JavaScript, into valid HTML, right? And all of that can be done in one function versus seven lines of code, right? That is what makes React so crucial, but that's also what will allow us to move from building these websites, which is standard JavaScript and have to be imperative, to more declarative programming in React, where we can describe the user interface we want and then render it on the screen in one line. So if that makes sense to y'all, give me a thumbs up. Hopefully I got all the way to the end and some folks get where we're coming from. You know what I'm saying? I appreciate y'all for your time. So here's what we're going to do, right? All y'all got to do next is continue to follow this tutorial, learn the JavaScript that gets into working with React, and you'll start to learn some more about the particularities of the three aspects of React that are important: components, props, and state. Next time, we'll be building some sites using those three aspects so that you can understand how to build an actual React application using those things. And we'll go take it from there. We're gonna, sky's the limit. We're gonna keep building, keep hacking, and keep making these web applications. So thank y'all for rocking with me. Show me some love, and you're free to go and just keep an eye on things as we